Hello, everybody, and welcome to the District House. My name is Hannah Jo, if you're new here, and the District House is an extension of District216, which is a membership-driven psychedelic social club here in downtown Santa Barbara. Every Wednesday night, I have the wonderful opportunity to interview some psychedelic pioneers in our community. And tonight, I'm here with Katie and Lisa. They're actually joining us from San Diego. So thank you for journeying to make it here tonight, ladies.
Thank you.
So I would love for each of you to share a little bit more about yourself, anything that you feel is important for the audience to know about you.
Well, I voted psychedelics off the ballot like 12 years ago. And now 98% of what I do is in the psychedelic realm. Very interesting how that little turn of events happened. I am an integrative PTSD trauma therapist, so I tend to just be a very humanist kind of person. It's less about therapy than it is about connection. I work a lot in the psychedelic space. I actually have been working with the Mission Within for years, working with Ibogaine and 5-MeO. I also work with a church out of Austin. It's an entheogenic church called the Illuminating Company. Our nonprofit side works with veterans and first responders, and we have a for-profit side that we're really trying to build up so we can get some funding for veterans and first responders. It's really beautiful work. I absolutely love it. And then, in my day-to-day life, I'm pretty much just doing preparation and integration for folks that are going through, most specifically working with the special operations community. That's kind of been my focus since I began this work. So I got into it kind of dragging my feet. I never thought that my whole life would be curated around this, but here I am, and the changes that I've seen have been so incredibly profound, and I have seen so many lives saved because of the medicine that I will back it up to my dying day. I used to say that I wanted to be a millionaire, and then I realized that being a millionaire means touching a million lives. And I feel like at this point, I've done that. I've done that with the ripple effect of what these medicines and really appropriate preparation, integration / harm reduction can do for people so that they can continue on with these skills and really just develop the best relationship they can with themselves and with their family and their communities. So thank you for having me here.
Mm-hmm. Damn it, I should have gone first. So my name is Lisa McJunkin. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California, and I specialize working with complex PTSD. And I, too, was a psychedelic square prior to, in terms of never did I think that this realm was going to enter the vortex of work that I was working within, and kind of felt my hand being forced because the options for PTSD recovery just weren't in existence. And, what really brought me into this sector and this field was this serious concern that PTSD to this day in our DSM-5 does not have any official recovery-based diagnosis. Once diagnosed, you're considered needing to manage it, and that traditionally has unfortunately been a lot of how mental health has been formed around treatment of trauma, and really understanding the complexity of it and who does this involve and where does that go. And so I just kind of was like, yeah, I think that's bullshit. I think we can do better if we can have all this crazy tech around us and do all these really cool things and get people out of our atmosphere. We can figure out how to help heal the nervous system. So that's kind of the exploration path that I went on in this. I too, a lot due to this woman here, am involved with a lot of special operations individuals, and working a lot with individuals and spouses and family units, and really working with folks that have just kind of been considered like, I just need to now live with the level of this and information and understanding. And I think I think we still only understand like the tip of what the potential is. So I get very excited. You'll hear me get very nerdy out about like, oh my gosh, we could do so many things.
She sounds exactly like that when she gets nerdy too. It's very funny.
Very excited about things. But I'm just really honored to be here. I think a bigger part of reason why this is so important is having the community conversations that are above ground, that are sharing ideas, that are talking about what we're out there. So other people can fall into their paths with us and figure out what the best approach is. And, I know we'll be talking a lot about harm reduction, because that's another very big passion area that Katie and I both share, is just, how do you vet and understand what you're signing up for and getting in? And how do you vouch for what's out there? And how do you trust your gut in terms of who you're working with? And, is this sound when it's not necessarily sanctioned clinically or above ground? How do you manage this world that does not have a bureaucratic organization over it saying yes or no to things? And because of that, we have unfortunately also seen a lot of what we would consider really unsafe or harmful practices happening that are totally avoidable. So a big part of why I wanted to be here tonight was to just kind of share a little bit about what I learned and think is feasible for us to kind of let's just be mindful of this, and once we're aware, then we can make decisions what best serves us. So really appreciate being up here. This is a beautiful place to drive to, so I will drive here anytime. But thank you, and thank you guys for being here.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. And I feel it's so important for therapists or leaders in this community like yourselves to be felt by the community in your humanness and your authenticity of transformation. At one point you have this perspective and you're being real that perspective has evolved and transformed. And we're feeling hopeful that the limitation around healing PTSD, for instance, can also be transformed and rewritten. So thank you for being a bold pillar for that transformation. And I want to double click on the harm reduction and talk a little bit more about your personal definitions of that. And I like to learn through contrast. So when we see the harmful circumstance, that gives us the point of reference of what we do want to create that's sustainable and supportive to healing and growth. So I'd love for you to define that and share anything else that you feel is important.
You go first so I can one-up you.
Okay, so I'll start with the contrast piece. I think, something that I would kind of look in my lens of being like, I'm not sure if this is the most productive space for people to be in, is a lot of what we call like the wounded healer, where it's well-intentioned, the healing and the, I've done this journey, I've done it a couple of times, so I feel like I can facilitate it now and I can hold space, and, it's all about human connection. And so, we just need to just share, and I'm here with you and I got you. And it's really from a place of loving intention for that to happen. But unfortunately, there also needs to be a level of self-attention to why am I so interested in holding space? Why do I want to run forward with this so much? Oftentimes there's a lot of this might help with some of our own wounding. And when I think we're in these spaces of expanded consciousness, there is a need to understand how to manage your own nervous system, because the people that are in the journey are regulating their nervous systems to you. So if you are facilitating a journey space, you bear the responsibility of being very aware of your system and aware where you're stepping over into someone else having to carry your energy, or, when energy can be a lot in a journey, and carrying other people and holding space for that. And how do you breathe yourself through it? And you're not just taking it all on. And then what do you do pre and post journey? Do you go home and just down a 6-pack of IPAs because you're all revved up? It's like, what are your practices to help recalibrate your nervous system post? And so the wounded warrior, not wounded warrior, we like those ones, the wounded healers, those are the ones that I think I feel a lot of trepidation around. And it's not that you need to have a diploma or degree or anything, but I think it's a level of personal work as well as direct application and exposure to what you're trying to hold. And it's always an ever-evolving and growing process, but there's a lot of harm that can be done when a lot of people are seeking journey work, especially from a place of desperation, like this has to work. And so then, there's even more like, okay, well, if I'm facilitating this, then you have to move this. And anytime, I've learned this in doing, I just think about metaphysical energy work and stuff like that. There is this, like, you cannot move someone else's energy. Like, someone needs to be at a place of willingness. You can have skills to help kind of guide, like, hey, I think we can go here. But ultimately, it's the person's own soul path where they're going. So those are kind of some of the contrast pieces that I get very concerned about. And I think that also can flip easily into an ego dynamic of like, I'm now the guru, and I'm going to tell you how we're going to do this. And this is what your nervous system needs to do. And that kind of think tank like that group think of like, this is the way, which I love The Mandalorian, but it's just not. I don't think that's how healing is supposed to happen versus spaces that allow each person's nervous system to kind of unfold where they're at. And not everyone needs to be on the same plane at the same time. So those are, when I think about harm reduction, that's the picture of contrast of what I'm trying to move away from. From a therapist lens, I think there's a lot of liability involved in working in this field if you hold a licensure, any type of state licensure. And so there's a lot of concern of where are you out of your lane of where your assistance should be deferred to someone else. And so harm reduction from a licensed clinician standpoint is if someone is under a substance or I know that they are going to be utilizing substances, can we have that conversation of what your plan is and how comfortable are you with this and what does this look like? And allowing us to have these conversations versus like, oh, that's not sanctioned, I can't talk about that, right? And so that's kind of the lens that I really come at harm reduction from. Aha.
Dang it. I mean, harm reduction is such a widely varied definition. We talk about harm reduction and set and setting and ensuring that we have guides who have held the kind of space that is necessary for people to really drop in a very trusted kind of way. But one of my main focuses is ensuring that the person who is going to be experiencing psychedelics is well prepared. So harm reduction is first and foremost creating safety through the nervous system. One, we want to get them well regulated. We also want to be able to teach them how to tolerate stillness, because when you're laying there on 6 grams of psilocybin, you're not going anywhere. Or maybe you are, but hopefully you're not. And so there's a level of tolerance that needs to be gained in working with people going in, and just normalizing their experience, normalizing things like suicidality. We talk about this every single day in our process. We have to, because we want to escape the pain that we're feeling, which is one of the things that brings people to psychedelics. But we don't necessarily want this to be a panacea, like this is the one thing that's going to change everything. It's not. And it actually could make things a little bit rockier for a little while afterwards. And so we want to ensure that people have the skill sets that are necessary for them to be able to move through whatever it is that's coming up in their day-to-day life. So mindfulness, meditation, present moment focus, communication skills. These journeys aren't just about the one participant. This is about an entire ecosystem of humans who are also, moving in and out of their field. They're married or partnered up and they have children. So how do we create and integrate an entire system of healing so that everybody benefits from it? And it starts with one person, but again, we look at that ripple effect and how, if we're working with couples, and we work with couples a lot, which is really, really beautiful. Which is really beautiful. But one of the reasons that we do that is because then we can ensure that we have consistent communication between each one of our patients, and then we're all on the same page. Nothing gets lost in translation. So, working on trust, working on the nervous system, getting people to come into a sense of safety, because oftentimes with PTSD and TBI, it's like, we have a lot of considerations around that. We've got impulsivity, a lot of impulsivity, and it's a lot of impulsivity around stuff that it's not really a first choice. It's just like I'm drinking too much, or, I'm riding my motorcycle too fast, or, I've got this whole host of behaviors that I'm utilizing. So we have to learn how to slow that down. When you're going 95 miles an hour on the interstate and you get behind somebody who's going 55, what does it feel like? You want to scream your head off. You're like, get out of my fucking way. I can't do this. That's what it's like. So we have to titrate down. We have to teach them how to be able to tolerate that kind of stillness, so that we can look at the shadow pieces that are coming up, so that we can actually look at some of the traumas that are coming out sideways in their day-to-day life. And, I personally, when I'm working with people, I don't necessarily go back in time. We don't hop in the Wayback Time Machine and go explore like childhood trauma. I look at how is it playing out in your day-to-day life, and how can we amend that? So those are skills that they can utilize moving forward once we've popped the tab and decompressed some of this, overwhelmed system that they have.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And what I receive from that is that harm reduction is beyond the psychedelic container of experience, that it's before, it's after, and the root of it really comes to an awareness of where an individual is resonating. And if there's a tendency to be impulsive or reactive, to have enough space around that to choose slowness and maybe breath or other mindfulness practices that you're offering.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the difference between a reaction and a response is 5 breaths. It's that simple.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's important for all of us to receive. So when we notice that reactivity, we can play with that. How do we feel after 5 breaths? And then do we come into our ability to respond? I'm appreciating this conversation, and I'm resonating a lot with what you're sharing. And something else that I really appreciated was this piece of willpower or personal power that you're offering and extending to individuals and couples that you work with. And, that's sometimes challenging in a culture or in systems that are not supporting our ownership of our reality. And so I'm wondering if there's anything you want to share about how people can reclaim their personal power, and if that's through body awareness or intuition, and how they can bridge that with their logic and intellect and their resources when they're in the preparation process of exploring healing modalities like psychedelics or otherwise.
I actually talk about this a lot with a lot of associate clinicians and other licensed clinicians that are getting into this space. And as we seek supervision, it's kind of like, what is the best technique, right? And I think a lot of us are taught, there's you can almost, it's palpable to feel the fear of a new therapist that's like, what do I need to learn? I need to learn everything. I need to sign up for 20 trainings and read 50 books about this and get all the downloads and all the podcasts. And, and it's, I think a bigger part that I really try to resonate with is really resonating with how does this individual organically move energy. And I tend to find that as humans, we all have a nervous system, so there's a level of regulation that is predictable, but how we organically orient to the world is a little bit more on a spectrum. So, when I'm working with folks, it's like I need to be able to speak to the Western, really cognitive, very cerebral individual that needs to understand what this is doing at a molecular level and how this is going to thought change and mix core schemas and, and all how the resonance of that and, what does this mean, all the way over to the other side of the spectrum where, it's a much more spiritual, soulful, this is my soul contract, what's blocking me, this is lineage work, this is lifetime work. And I think part of it's just meeting people where they're at now and then getting really clear, where are you wanting to go from here? You might not be wanting to resonate with soul contracts. You might be doing just fine in the cerebral world, but you're like, I'm just getting stuck in these patterns. And so I think a bigger part from a facilitator standpoint is, can you be adaptable in speaking the language of how that person resonates versus just how I resonate with it? And so I think that is when I'm thinking about how do you provide, to this infinite study of what is psychedelics, how do you provide some concretes? So the best way I can understand it is like, okay, how would, and I usually ask whoever I'm working with, like, where do you consider yourself on the spectrum of this? Like, what speaks to you? Tell me a little bit about how you, when you're up against a challenge, like, how do you come at it? And so some people I know, I'm very much a body processor. Stress has about T-2 seconds before I have like a somatic reaction to it, right? And like other folks, it's like, no, I need time to process and download. So I think the first part's just getting really curious about like, where do you typically process and how's it working for you? Do you like it? Are you wanting to adapt it? Are you good here? And then developing kind of the plan in place in terms of what intentionality we're going into medicine work based on that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's kind of how I look at that piece.
Similarly, and probably because Lisa and I have worked together for a very long period of time, we actually, I don't know, what'd you say, like a decade ago? God, we're getting old. We started working together at an intensive outpatient therapy program. And she came and snagged me out of a different department. And she was my lead. But one of the things that we did was we were able to create an integrative PTSD trauma program. And this program was really beautiful because we weren't utilizing fully cognitive models like most of the other programs were doing, like COG and DBT. And we started actually working with more of the metaphysical, the subtle energy bodies with people, and utilizing things like healing touch, which is similar to Reiki. I snuck my tuning forks in there, and we did a lot of like guided meditations,
somatic experiencing, mindfulness.
Yeah. And we started just watching self-reported scores diminish substantially. I mean, so much more quickly than any of the cognitive models out there were doing. And so it does come down to really just meeting somebody exactly where they're at, but also knowing that we don't have to blow the doors off of anything. Like we can go very slow. There is no finish line to any of this. We're all just trying to get a little bit better. And so, I think if we just remain really aware, and I think awareness is probably a key word in all of this, being aware and being present of where somebody is in their body. Are they dissociated? Are they in fight flight? Have they been frozen for 2 years and now they're screaming and we're high-fiving each other because they're not frozen anymore? It's like we see this entire back to the spectrum of where people are energetically, and psychedelics is a great fit for some, but it's not a great fit for other people, And so even looking at the conversations that we're having around psychedelics with certain clients is really critical, because there are clients where I would never encourage them even to think about something like ayahuasca if they're totally dysregulated and they can't be in their body. And we really want to focus on being here and being present and being really regulated. And then, maybe we work with a somatic therapist until they're feeling a little bit more embodied. And then, if psychedelics is something that we're looking at, maybe it's ketamine. Maybe that's a really good first start that's got a nice westernized, set and setting, and it's medicalized, and you've got lots of therapists and nurses around you that create another sense of safety. Or, maybe it is ibogaine down in Mexico for somebody who has TBI and tons of inflammation. And so it's just a larger conversation of really looking at this in a very individualized way, because this is not a one size fits all for anybody. I'm sure any of you sat with psychedelics. I feel like this is the right room to ask that question, right? Some people can sit with 10 grams and be totally fine. some people can sit with 1 gram and they end up like way out in the universe. So, the medicines do what the medicines want to do. And the best thing that we can do is just ensure that we have done the best that we can to prepare people to manage whatever it is that comes up. So, very long-winded answer.
I appreciate it. It's all so important.
It's very spectrum.
Very spectrum.
Giving full spectrum.
It is.
But what I appreciate about what you've both shared is that the process you're leading people through is a process of self-realization and self-individuation, to acknowledge one's uniqueness and that their needs and visions for their future are to be determined by them to some degree, and that they can call upon resources like yourself or the ceremony space or the clinical space to catalyze that becoming. But it seems like the work you provide is really around supporting people in finding themselves and letting that awareness of themselves then inspire their healing. And that's what I really appreciate about both of your embodiment is you don't need anyone to change for you. You're available to reflect and accelerate the change if they're there willing and receptive to your invitation.
If I could, I think that would be something that I would love if there was one nugget takeaway from me being here. It is that feeling of it is okay to directly ask whoever you are working with, tell me kind of what your philosophy around healing is. Tell me how do you get people to that place, And I think that is really telling when you are hearing someone describe how they do healing. Whether it's very ego-based, whether it's very cerebral-based or somatic-based, but also just in general, that idea of this piece of, do they believe in healing? I think a big part of Western medicine and Western therapy is symptom-focused, and A plus B equals C, and now this is what we do to manage it, and this symptom is separate from the whole system, right? And so I think that is a really key piece is how do you build embodiment in folks is first you got to work with people that believe in personal self-empowerment and connection. So whether that's connecting to your gut sense or your higher self or whatever verbiage and tradition you use, but is there a belief that people intrinsically have the ability to heal? And it's you cut your finger, you don't tell your body how to heal, it goes to work. And then, if it gets infected and we need intervention, we use it to help, but the body is still doing its healing mechanism. And unfortunately, I think mental health is almost seen very separately from that. It's this other different beast, it just affects your brain, and it can't heal on its own. This is not something you can figure out. And granted, there's been quite a few things where it's I've tried to figure this out on my own and I can't connect to that. And so the focus is more what do you think is blocking why we haven't been able to come up? And typically, when you start asking questions like that, you find that it's for a self-protected evolutionary reason that I'm not coming up with a solution right now because I'm not in a place where either I can feel like I can execute it or I don't have the resources or something like that. And so it's never, I think what I really love about working from humans or self-healing beings in this place is this piece of there's nothing for us to do or learn or earn to get there. It's about accessing what's already here and coming home to self, remembering these parts, remembering that I come from people and the earth and a lineage of people that have toiled to get here. So this might be rough now, but it just expands my perspective of my ability. Sorry, that was a little tangent, but I think it's a really important one of we should be asking who we work with, what is their philosophy in this? And that gives you a really good, is this a good human connection? Or is it more oh, thank you very much, I'm going to go over here now.
Yeah, totally. I really like that question, and I think that's really important. And the word healing in itself can feel abstract to some. And so just personally to add, defining what healing is for an individual or a space holder. Are there more questions that you can suggest for offering for the vetting process of connecting with facilitators or even other healers?
That's a gigantic question. Yeah, and this is a conversation that we have all of the time because there's no one size fits all. And you know, you've got people who are really, really good with just kind of working with kind of your worried well, you're more just kind of anxious person. And then you have people who work with really big, deep trauma, you know, and they require different dispositions, different abilities to hold big energies that come up. I always want to know, what kind of work have you done? You know, where did you learn? Do you have mentorship? Do you work in community with other people that can call you on your BS? You know, where are the checks and balances? What do you do to ensure safety within your container? That's a big one. I mean, we've been seeing more and more come up in the psychedelic space about injuries or deaths that have happened, and many of those are avoidable. So what kind of screening process do you have? Are you checking bags when people come in? You know, how are we ensuring that people are staying well hydrated while they're in their journeys? You know, we'll come out and we got these Charlie horses and we're like, what happened? It's like, well, you might need some element. Eat a salt packet. Yeah, so you know, those are some of the basics, but I also want to know, what kind of community are you engaged in? Because none of us are doing this. I shouldn't say none of us are. Many people are. And I'm going to should on this, but we should be in community. We should be in community. We should be sitting around a fire talking about this, you know, normalizing the process, ensuring that people who are engaged in helping others to heal, and I don't like to call them healers because they're not the ones doing the healing. The person is doing the healing. They're attuning to that other person. But ensuring that they're not carrying a burden all by themselves. Normalizing what you might hear or what comes up in a session. Especially for therapists, I think this gets really, really dicey. You know, if you're doing CAP therapy or something and somebody comes up with a confession or an idea or a fear of something that they might do or feel like they might have done, it's like, where does that sit ethically? Well, you need to have other therapists or other mentors that you can talk to about that, right? Because we don't necessarily just want to run to reporting immediately if somebody is under the influence of something. You know, so many of these concepts are just that, they're concepts. It's not a concrete thing that people are talking about. It's, you know, it's symbolic in a lot of ways. So, you know, we want to understand, or we want to ensure that people who are holding these spaces are well aware of the kinds of content that can come up, the kinds of energy that is released when people are in the medicine. You know, I think there's a lot of expectation that you just get to, you know, as a therapist, like doing CAP therapy, you just kind of get to sit there and watch somebody. But, you know, I've seen people on ketamine throw themselves out of chairs. Like it's not unheard of to have people have big reactions to these medicines. So it's like, what is your safety protocol also?
Yeah, I think people spend more time vetting purchasing a vehicle than they do who we pick to help us on these really vulnerable, life potentially altering kind of scenarios. And, you know, myself is included in that, like the amount of doom scrolling I'll do. And then it's like, all right, well, you know, you're in my net insurance network, like, let's try you out, right? And there's just kind of this like, well, you're here, you say you do this. And so I think vetting is kind of looking at like, what is your traditional vetting process that you have for most things? And are you holding your providers or, you know, folks that are attuning to you at the same level that you would vet spending a bunch of money or time or effort on something that you care deeply about? And that's going to look a little different for all of us and what that looks like. So for me personally, if I don't have a vibe that you're a human that I'd want to hang out with outside, and I understand that it's not appropriate, I can't hang out with you, but like if I don't find you to be an interesting human, I don't necessarily want to spend my time, effort, and energy hanging out with you and connecting with you in a deep, vulnerable space. So I kind of wish we would treat finding practitioners more like speed dating. Like, I'm going to try out a couple different folks in terms of, consulting. That's why therapists have and coaches have free consultation hours. Try us out. Ask us some questions. Fire away. Ask a little saucy question like, what are your hobbies? It kind of feels a little like a first date question type of thing. But I think it's helping with this idea of taking down this barrier of, I know this and you're coming to me for help. And now we're in this different type of relationship versus human to human connection and the ability to hold boundaries for what my position is in this connection at certain periods of time. Right. So again, that's like something that I want to vet and do, and that's my process. But I think in general, it's more like just even the idea of having permission to vet our people. And I think this is much harder when we have, the insurance industry definitely dictates how we do treatment here, unfortunately, and accessibility and resources is a big thing. And so, but why are we not asking our insurance providers the same questions in terms of vetting? The worst that they're going to say is like, I'm not comfortable answering that. You'd be like, all right, that's information I need to have, and so it's kind of, I think there's this scope that we just kind of okay, this person's assigned to me or this person's here, so let's just ride with this versus like, this is my time, this is my effort, this is my energy, this is my story. It's really important that I connect with who I share my story with. So those are kind of what I...
And I think on the flip side, too, it's also really important to give permission for practitioners to vet their people, right? We can give each other permission to say no and then refer. If somebody's not an appropriate fit for you, then you're providing a disservice to somebody who could be getting what they really need from somebody else. There's enough sunshine out there for everybody. We don't have to just take it because we can get it. So I think vetting definitely goes both ways.
I love that you touched, because I think the scarcity thinking, especially when cash pay is involved, these are big numbers traditionally used for psychedelic ceremonies, and there's like a hoarding. Like, these are my people, this is what I do, these are my resources, and it's like, and then everyone's after the same pot of gold, like feverishly like running around. And I think that as a provider, part of the mindset needs to be, it is okay. It is like, there's enough for all of us. There's more than enough trauma for enough people to work in this industry, and what this looks like. And that's okay. And also having some of the belief systems that we're trying to practice and preach about, which is like, if this is not flowing, I need to look at why, right? Like, what is my gut feeling on this? What's not flowing about this? The person's really great. They said they do, but it's just not clicking. Let's look at it. Let's talk about it, have a conversation, and figure it out. But I need to have that conversation with myself in terms of like, is this me? Like, what's going on? What does that look like? So I think I love the idea of like, it's vetting on both planes. It's kind of like an emotional intelligence interview where you kind of like, they're asking you questions, you're asking them questions, and then you kind of make a decision. Does this feel like a good fit? It's not meant to be this permanent, forever relationship. And I think when you're looking at it from a more metaphysical lens or the side, or even from, if you take a Western therapy, it's like there's so many sessions, and it's more like, hey, like, this is what I think I can help you on this part of your path. And then you are going to surpass my ability, right? And that's my job, to keep cultivating my edge of growth and what I can offer and expand on. But I am a firm believer that I meet people and in a part of the path, and if we click, then it's like, that's my job, is to help guide that part of the path. And then there's going to be a launching for me into the next part of the path. And maybe there's a tune-up and a check-in here and there, but that is, I think, the whole purpose of this, which is human evolution. So if I'm a provider that's so concerned about keeping all my little ducklings here, I just create a vortex in which, like, I've now moved you from out of empowerment into, like, you need me to help you get here. And that's kind of where I think a lot of this part of the vetting process is to also see, like, where's the person in terms of their commitment to doing the work. And this model of, like, you're like, I hope you outgrow me. And, like, that will be fabulous. And, like, let me know who you're seeing next, because I probably need to go see them too. Like, you know, like, and that ability to share resources. And I think that goes back to what Katie talks about healing and community. Yeah. So, you know, I think sometimes even if I get locked into something, and I'm like, I'm not sure this is the best person, consider pivoting. Try it out. See where it lands. That's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like what you're describing, I connect to, and also in our culture, we're not taught adaptability. Yeah. We're actually taught to be very fixed in who we become in the world and the pathway that we choose and stick to. And so what you're speaking to, it's very radical to choose to be pivotal, to be able to test one thing out and feel into it, and then turn your attention another way and try that out. And I think it's a really important life skill to be able to have that. And I love what you said around the dependency that someone may create around the space holding or the resource that you're providing. And if you were to take responsibility for their healing, you would be disempowering them and disempowering yourself. So that's a really powerful thing to claim, especially when you say, I hope you outgrow me. I hope you meet my edge and go beyond that and guide me there too, just through that reflection. I think that's a really important piece of humility for anyone who's holding healing or therapeutic space. Well, it's been really sweet chatting with you both, and I want to give space to turn it to the audience. Yeah. So audience, be with all that has been shared. And we're going to give space for any audience questions to be spoken. And you will receive a mic so we can capture your audio for our online audience. So if any questions are coming through, feel welcome to raise your hand.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoy so much listening to your experience. And there is few questions. In the preparation for the client or the subject, you said that you focus, one of the things that you said, you focus on the preparing the nervous system. How do you do that? What are you specifically referring to?
Well, first of all, it's not that simple. Never is. I'm really looking at what is the baseline natural state of your nervous system right now as it stands. So are you more activated or are you underactivated? Are you in a state of more of that fight flight?
But that is a reading of the client, correct? When you are doing your interview?
Yeah. Yep. So what I do is tailored to where their nervous system is. So if I have somebody who is in more of a freeze state, then I'm going to help them bring a little bit more sensation into their body and feel more grounded. And sometimes that means utilizing a lot of breath work. We're always utilizing a lot of breath work so that we're getting these brain centers to begin to communicate. But then we're also bringing sensation into larger muscle groups inside of the body that feel very safe. And in doing that, they can begin to find sensation in their body, because many people who are more frozen, they don't have the communication in their brain to their body that allows them to feel. And so we have to create ways for them to feel their body again. So in working with the nervous system, for somebody who maybe is in more of that anxious, that fight-flight state, we're going to want to deactivate their nervous system. So we're going to want to really lean in on their parasympathetic nervous system and slow it down. So the breathing techniques are going to be a little bit different, but it almost always starts with breathing. And I tell all of my clients, you have to breathe anyway, so you might as well do it on purpose. So we really just want to engage the parasympathetic nervous system to either activate or deactivate.
You do that at the beginning when you are analyzing the client, if it's suitable for your practice.
Say that again?
when you are interviewing your subject, is when you go through this process.
That's when I'm really looking to see where they're at, kind of on that scale. So that's more initial.
Okay.
And then there's lots of other things that you can do too. I mean, you've got lots of vagal nerve stimulation.
No,
you
it's
can,
not one thing. It's
there's
part
so
it's part
many
of the
things.
process to prepare
Yeah.
them if they're going to work
Yeah,
with you.
so it's really tailor-made to each person.
Okay. And the other thing that the other thing is you're coming from the medical angle and incorporating psychedelics. Is that correct?
So with ketamine?
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of the journey work I do now is very much above ground and working and building a integrative health and wellness clinic known as Daydream MD in San Diego that does traditional therapy forms, psychiatry, as well as ketamine-assisted therapy. And so in that model, there is attention to both the medical side of what's happening and then attention to the behavioral health side and the mental health side and what's the container and where's the person at. So it's ideally what should be happening in all containers with psychedelics, as far as I'm concerned, to really ensure safety. Like there is no 100% safe psychedelic exploration on your own, right? And so, if we're going to move the needle and do this with populations where there's increased vulnerability in 10 plus years, where other things have not worked, and this more edge of intensity of what we're going after, we need to really curate where medical and psych work together. And these have been traditionally such siloed places. And even like navigating California, forming a business with medical and psych in an outpatient setting, this has been a huge learning curve over the last 2 years where I'm like, what did I sign up for? I could have just worked at the hospital and, cashed in on, I'd probably be obese with a drinking problem, but it'd be okay. Like I'll figure it out, so I think that is these two sides traditionally don't speak, and we don't speak the same language, and we come at it from a very kind of different vantage point. But it's so beautiful when treatment teams collaborate and you hear these perspectives. So, the ER doc who's doing the prescribing of ketamine is coming at it from a very different viewpoint of what he thinks the person can metabolize, and we're sharing what I think the person's nervous system can handle from a distress tolerance point of view, not just a medical tolerance, right? Like that's where I think magic happens, because now you're like really looking at the whole system, and there's endocrine functioning and TBI treatments and all these layerings of things that need to happen. But I think it's more, if we started having more demand that this happened, that this is how treatment happens in these settings, then that's what's going to move the needle, right? So it's a very big thing to me. I think what people are so frustrated about in the medical model is I go here for this, and then I get referred to here, and then I get referred to here. But there's not one person that actually looks at the whole picture and is helping me. They're just focusing on their part of the puzzle. And then when they're done with their puzzle piece, they're like, go back to here, right? And that's really what tradition before Western medicine ever treated humans like that. Right? So if I came from a more Eastern philosophy background and that was my cultural standpoint, I'd go in saying like, I have headaches all the time. They'd be like, well, what's the pain in your head? Well, my mother-in-law lives with me. Well, that's the pain in your head. It's like they would look at it from more of that vortex and be like, okay, what can we do around that versus just like, maybe you got a tumor. Maybe this is something. Maybe we need, it's like, I think there's a lot more just organicness in this that often is not met. And then I think to answer your first question, I think in terms of like what Katie was saying with breath work, I think a big part, her and I are very experiential therapists. So we tend to let people know, like, if you want a processing therapist that you're just going to vent to, and like, we're like, we're going to bug the shit out of you. Like, because we're like, all right, break it down. What do you got going on? What have you tried? Where would you like to be? All right, you game for trying something. Let's try a couple things here and just see what happens. And so a lot of in session, instead of it being more like an interview, and I'm just going off my checklist of questions for you, it's more like, okay, talk to me about, I noticed like when you say that, there's an intensity that comes up. What's going on for you right now? And if you took an exhale with me for just a second and just dropped, where do you notice that landing in your body? Okay, why do you think it lands there versus anywhere else, right? And you're doing the work and you're showing how to co-regulate in session at the same time. And that's what allows for a depth to keep coming up. And it's how we are able to better determine this is my edge. This is what I'm being called to work on right now versus, oh, it'd be really helpful if I worked on this and I probably should work on this. We all have goal boards that we want to hit. We all have things that we want to do. But I think the body also has very clear downloads of like, this is what is interrupting. So helping, especially our very cerebral culture, get down below the neck is a strategy I know both of us really rely on with folks.
Hello. I really appreciate your talk tonight. Thank you so much for coming. I'd like to ask a question about the clients that you usually work with. It's my understanding that you specifically or most often work with military people. Is that correct?
So we definitely both specialize in working with military individuals and veterans and first responders and what's considered special operators and elite performers. But both of us have very diverse backgrounds in terms of, I started working with kids in child welfare system and probation and their families for a long time. And then working in the hospital gave us a very huge gamut of general population, everything from worried well to single and multiple incident traumas. And that takes a lot of different, different presentations of that. So, I think if I was to say, it's more like I work with nervous systems that are highly traumatized. And that can look in a multitude of different ways, from a single incident car accident that just happened 10 days ago to a near-death experience to 20 plus years in the military, getting out and transitioning to I'm on med leave and I wasn't expecting to leave my career. So I guess that's a very long-winded way of saying the population over the years. And now that we've been doing this for a minute, so each gig we pick up just broadens the spectrum. Yeah. And then the spectrum that's wanting to work with psychedelics is super broad. Yeah. You have everything from psychonauts who want to blast off and let's see God, to folks that are like, I just want to breathe deeply for the first time in a long time. Yeah. Right? So that's kind of, I don't know if that answers anything that you were looking for.
It does. That's a wonderful resume, by the way. I would like to ask a question specifically about the military people that you work with. And what I'm interested, or if you have any insight in, I would be interested in, is we have a volunteer military now. These are people who are choosing this career path. Mm-hmm. And I would also say a lifestyle. It's not simply a career. It goes beyond career. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering if you had any observations about the people that you are working with, specifically who have volunteered for military or first responders, what type of personalities, if there's a major issue or click that you see, a blockage that is easy to identify as something that happens with military and first responders, and how you address that, a typical military veteran experience, if you have one.
No, that's all.
It's a pie. It's every person is just a different piece of the pie. In the military, you still have people who have gone to Ivy League schools, and then you've got people who were homeless for their entire childhood. And, most of the trauma that I see, it's childhood trauma. There's a lot of maybe moral injury and cognitive dissonance over what happened maybe while you're in the military, but usually what sets people up for trauma and it coming out sideways at some point in their older age is childhood trauma, and it's usually attachment oriented. So that's probably the easiest way to say it, because I think we also need to be really careful about not putting people into a box, and having them look a certain way, even just the, military first responder, therapist, nurse, doctor, artist. We all are doing our path for a reason, and there's not one thing that causes any of us to do that. So, I think really we just honor the variation and just understand that it's just a human being human, and that it's just the trauma that comes out sideways at some point in their life.
I really second what Katie is saying, and I think the few things that I think this brings together a bigger question is like, what dictates what's trauma, right? And so I take an emotional or an evolutionary psych perspective on this, is that humans are made with nervous systems to discharge trauma energy, and that is how we were made, right? And so it's our level of, there's not a generation of humans that does not incur trauma. Like the birth canal is traumatic. Like our entry into the world is technically trauma. There's probably a really good reason why most of us don't remember it. And so I think the bigger part is not getting into the narrative. The narrative is very important because it's my unique experience. And there's a level of needing to witness and validate and hold and honor that. And I think a big part that when I'm working with folks is this understanding that the narrative is important, but before we hop into narrative, I like to understand a little bit about your worldview since these events have occurred. And what do you make it mean? And so traditionally, what I see that makes something complex trauma has a lot to do with what was my worldview and my sense of self-concept before these events occurred. So for example, if I was in a single incident car accident and it was pretty rough and I came out of it, I'm still going to have what would appear almost like classic PTSD symptoms. I'm going to be hypervigilant. I'm not going to want to drive, a high startle response. I'm going to be really nervous and anxious, and if I have not typically had a history of car accidents, my worldview might be something like, this was a one-off. You've been driving since you were 16. This was really rough, but you know what? You made it, and not everyone makes it, so let's be grateful for that. And, public transport does not exist in San Diego. Like, we've got to drive. Like, what are we doing? And over time, and with my tribe and their support, I will likely, what studies show, and what I continue to find is my level of resiliency will actually be better than before I got the car accident because I have more attunement and awareness to not only my abilities, but traffic, right, in that incident. The difference, I think, is when there's multiple incidents of trauma and there is not actual healing or attention or tribe or connection in between, my worldview then is, see, this is what I'm talking about. People aren't fucking safe. The world is not a good place. You can't trust anyone. You can't trust women. You can't trust men. Money is the root of all evil, right? Like we get into these concepts and perceptions, and these events then just almost like stockpile and reinforce this narrative. And so I see a lot of trauma work is not actually the events people have gone through. It's what is the perception I'm holding because these events have occurred. And what is that perception, me holding that, what does that then do? Because what you tend to find then is if I have that perception, I usually am noticing, attracting, participating in dynamics that tend to fuel more complex trauma. So I know it sounds a little roundabout, but I think a way to kind of help try to answer what you're talking about is like, is there a difference in working with military trauma versus other trauma? There is. The ecosystems are different. It's like cultures. Right, so the culture of a special operator is very different than the culture of a general enlisted person that did 4 years. It just is. And I need to have some awareness to that, and that awareness was brought by dialogue, right? Tell me what that's, I've never enlisted. I have no idea what it's like to be a SEAL. How the hell did you get up and do these deer drowning things and then just keep going? Buddy swims, forget it. I watch like 12 shark videos and I'm done with the ocean. Like, what are you talking here, right? And so I think that part is like, that's just human-to-human connection. And I think this is another place where it's like the medical and the mental health world. You don't really inquire whether your surgeon has had every surgery they can perform, but like in mental health, we're like, do you have kids? Are you married? What's the status on that? Where's your trauma? Right? It's like we get into like that place. And so I think it's more about assessing the perception and tell me about your history with this. And that once the whole ball game, I think, of trauma recovery and therapy in general is perception expanding. And that's why altered states of consciousness like psychedelics offer such a potential benefit that we haven't really seen in this industry before.
May I follow that up with a question? You brought up the terminology cognitive dissonance. I was just wondering if you had a way of defining it within your practice. or anything that you would like to comment regarding cognitive dissonance?
I'll just give you an example. I like chocolate ice cream, but I know I shouldn't eat it. There's a gap in between the belief and the way that it feels in the body. We get cognitive dissonance all the time. Like, our brain is constantly spinning cognitive dissonance, decision making all the time, but we just don't notice it, right? And the cognitive dissonance is having an idea or a belief that can feel two different ways at one time. And you're like, ugh, like, I know I should eat broccoli because it's good for me, but ugh, it's disgusting. So it's like working with that really is like, well, where do we sit on the spectrum of this, and how can we move in between this is totally disgusting, which might be a completely true belief, and this is really good for me and I know that I can have it, right? Like, can we maybe put some garlic and lemon on it instead? You know, just a really simple, real world example. And I'm not eating broccoli tonight, in case you're wondering.
I want to ask you about shame with these folks that you work with.
Well, shame is of the human element. Every one of us carries a little bit of shame.
I was asking specifically around PTSD and hiding in the outer world.
Yeah, you know, again, it's that piece of pie. Some people have shame around their experiences, and some people don't. You know, the one thing that I can say in the work with psychedelics, and this has actually been really beautiful, is that a lot of the men and women who, I think you're probably referring especially to like special operations, after psychedelics, it's a little bit neutralized. Like, it was kind of like mano y mano. I decided to be there, you decided to be there, and so it helps to kind of lift a little bit of that off. But, you know, shame is one of those secondary emotions. We can continue to feed it over and over and over. So if we're watching our narrative around what it is that happened, and we can begin to shift some of that, it can help to lessen some of it as well. But shame is just part of our human experience. It's part of everybody's experience. And so I think one of the things that I really focus on is just normalizing that, not letting it be a bigger burden for one population over another, because, again, it's just part of our human condition.
I see shame as like almost an exacerbation of guilt that you can't do anything to shift out of or away from, right? So I always see like, and evolutionary wise, like, we need these things. Like, guilt is like, hey man, that didn't feel right. We probably shouldn't do that again, right? Like, we should have a level of guilt or we'll be kind of terrifying humans. And so guilt is meant to kind of be like, hey, check yourself, right? And then unfortunately, if we are in circumstances and don't have the resources, or we're following orders, or we're doing things and that we wouldn't normally agree to do consciously, walking around my community, that creates a bit of like this like wrinkle in like, this is beyond just guilt. This is now like, I am morally injured, or I'm subhuman, or I don't deserve, right? And then we create narratives that just keep it locked in place. So the psychedelics aren't moving shame. They're allowing us to access and understand why shame is here. Shame is showing up because for a while I've had this wrinkle and I didn't know what to do with it. And I felt like I needed to carry it because I don't know how else to think like I can honor, you know, what I now know. And so I think that's part of the beauty of any work, and this can be done without psychedelics. I think you could sit under a tree, put your feet on earth, you can go to a beach, you can do all that, you could breathe. Shame is, in my mind, is like when something has been locked in and I'm being called to pivot, and I don't know how to pivot, and then I start to feel trapped. So I have a running theory that, from an evolutionary standpoint, humans start getting real feral when we feel trapped. And it's just part of our survival instinct, and that's why there's a Lord of the Flies thing, like it's going to be eat or be eaten if we're in that mode. So very hard to play in the sandbox with other humans when I'm in survival mode. And so a big part, and that's why so many folks who are locked in shame are like, I want to go off grid. Like, I don't want to see another human. I want to go live in a cave. I'm going to Montana. I'm going to this place. Like, that's what I'm doing. And it's like, okay, I would love you to go there because you want to be there versus I have to escape all this, right? And that's where the empowerment piece comes in. And so in my, just in general and just working with another human, regardless of the modality, really understanding that shame comes with the territory of just working with things that are stuck. And then the objective is like, okay, how do we create some pivot? Because otherwise, we're just going to hang out in Shameville. And I can hang out in Shameville with you, but it looks really fucking miserable. Like, let's try some stuff. You game? Yeah, right? And it does. I mean, like, when I'm in a shame spiral, I mean, like, it's rough. It's like, like I should have made all these different decisions and where did I go in my life and what I'm sitting here in Santa Barbara talking to you all and I, had a lovely lunch on a Wednesday. Like, how bad is my life right now? Like, not that bad, and so it's, right? But I think it's very easy to lose sight of my ability to pivot and to feel feral. And that's how I like to think about shame. It's me getting into a very feral state that I am organically, as a human, my nervous system is trained to go in to embrace and adapt to the fact that I am trapped. So I can be mentally trapped or physically trapped, but I'm still existing, so I have to still carry on, right? So shame needs to be there to help me remember, like, I need to pivot. Right? But it really depletes quality of life. Anyone who's been stuck in a shame spiral can attest to this. It is rough. Like, it is, and that's why they talk about, like, this work is not for the faint of heart. Like, it is like, when you show up to do work, you are doing work. These are not spa retreats. Like, no one is coming to hang out with us because they want to hang out with us. Like, no one's excited to come to couples therapy or individual therapy or do integration. Like, everyone's like, oh, fuck, man, I'm here. I've tried everything before I came to see you. Now, okay, let's do this. But I think the relatability of this is not just you. This is what all humans do when we get to a trapped place. And just that kind of social learning piece, I think, really helps.
I think the other thing about shame, too, that's really important, and I work a lot with shame, is that shame shows up because it is protecting us, right? It's protecting us from getting too close or, saying the wrong thing or being too open or vulnerable. So, if we can explore what it is that actually looks like and what's underneath it, there's almost always something underneath shame. Right? Is it fear? What is the fear about? What's underneath the fear? So we get to just keep going layer by layer, but we take it slow because we also have to create a safe space for shame to show up. Otherwise, it's going to be like, sayonara, and then he's out the door. So with all of this, it's like we invite in a conversation. And it is very similar to even what this feels like. And what you're seeing with us is very much how we interact with all of the people in our realm. But there's a method to the madness, right? I mean, first of all, I want to be human and I want to connect to you as a human and I want your human to feel safe. And I want you to know that all of you is welcome here, even the shame parts, even those parts that you don't want to look at. Those are important storytellers in our lives. Those are the ones that if we can just listen and really decipher what it is that it's saying, there is a richness. There is a richness in the teaching that they have. So create a safe space, normalize it, know that this is something that we all walk around with, and it's okay. This is part of the beautiful aspect of psychedelics too, is just because of the way that they create so much neuroplasticity, sometimes we get to move around it and look at it from a different perspective, which is like, oh man, I've been carrying that with me. I didn't even need to carry that with that. It had nothing to do with me, which more often than not is the case.
More little sidebar nugget that came to mind on this is that I think if we approach this, and I think this is about like how our community approaches learning, But if we approach this as like, hey, this is something I'm really stuck in, or this is really coming up, and I got curious about there have been how many other humans on this planet that have had to combat this or deal with this, how have they moved this? And all of a sudden, when it becomes this kind of study about, and it's hard to have the energy when you're in the throes of this, to have any energy to do any of that. So let me just speak. Like, it's not like, oh yeah, let me go pick up a book and I'm going to read it, But I think one part is starting to allow for this idea of, I am not the first and I won't be the last. So how did other people start to maneuver this? And for some, it's that concept of dualism. Like, yep, got shit tons of shame here. And look, there's a nice looking flower. Both can exist on the same planet at the same time, right? So like that would be like a dualism perspective. Or if it's, this is right here, right now, this is shit. and this too will have some type of like, I can maneuver this, right? And I think a big chunk of working with shame is acknowledging what is now. And that being without like, can we not add anything or take anything away? So a big part of what the shame spiral is I just keep adding. I keep thinking of all the things that like, yep, this is all the reasons why, right? And that's why a lot of like EMDR and techniques is about find the bike chain of like all the events that are linking together. And when you start hitting one event, the ones underneath it, I don't have to go through each traumatic event. These all are on a similar plane. And as soon as I start making a dent in one, some of them start shifting away. And that's how we get pragmatic with moving shame, is that it should be done very consciously. We should understand why it's here. We should understand why it's protecting us, like what Katie was saying. We should understand that this is an organic human process. I did not invent shame. Shame has been here forever, and unfortunately beings after me are going to have shame. So there's a human passage of like, shame exists, all right. And I think the other part is it also means that I need to figure out how I need to pivot and like that component. And so then that's how we get into actually moving shame.
I have a lot to say about shame. No, actually what I was going to say is, one of my largest focal points in the psychedelic realm is really around creating community. And one of the reasons why community is so important is because people are finding mentorship in community. People have a normalization of their experience. And this is how healing happens. Like, we are communal creatures, but many of us just have decided to live on an island because we think that it's simple. And it's not. We're creating so much discord within ourselves by being alone. Loneliness actually resonates as a pain pathway in the body. Actual pain from being lonely. Let that sink in. And when we're in pain, we're inflamed. When we're inflamed, we feel awful. And when we're in community, we're getting things like oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine and endorphins because we're interacting, we're making eye contact. And then we get to have these really important communication experiences. Like, hey, Joe, I'm really feeling like shit today. Yeah, man, I've been there too. What's going on, brother? Like, we get to bring this up and normalize it and just have a conversation like humans used to have.
Great. Thank you, audience, for expressing yourselves and getting those questions answered. I have a final few questions for you ladies before we close out. And the first is, I want to hear from you both individually about an altered state experience that was profound for your healing.
Like going through the
Only one.
There have been so many. I guess I will speak to my most, I actually have two. One of them was a psilocybin experience. We were sitting with a variety called Ghost, which are very strong. I only had about 4.5 grams, no visuals whatsoever. It was 6 hours of what I call war purging. It's the every breath of air or vomit, catch your breath, and then you do it again. I don't know what moved or what shifted, and I think that this is important because we're always trying to manage expectations. Not every journey is going to be pleasant, and it's not all going to be rainbows and butterflies, and you may not get one visual. But if something shifts afterwards, that's where the money is. But my most recent exciting experience was I went down to Gabon and I initiated with the Bwiti tradition, and there were so many really beautiful things about it, being in the land with the energy of the medicine, you know, hearing elephants like off in the distance and wondering if they're going to come and trample the village, because they do. But really it was looking at the community and watching the way that they loved and that they cared for one another. And it was something that really validated the work that I'm doing coming back, because the care and the interdependence that they, and not codependence, interdependence that they have for one another was one of the most inspirational things that I've ever seen in my lifetime, because they depend on one another to survive. But even more than that, it's thriving. Those kids didn't have self-esteem issues. They didn't have shame around their bodies. Everybody was celebrated. And that was such a beautiful experience to just see people in an environment where it's actually possible to experience that kind of just beautiful embodiment and acceptance. You can't beat Gabon.
You can't beat Gabon. I mean, Jesus. But, you know, I think for me, you know, at this point, I can't mess with psychedelics recreationally. I don't think my field understands that this is for fun and we're not doing deep soul work and gut-wrenching puking and all that stuff. So I've had a couple of hard lessons of like, don't mess with this stuff. This is, if you're not coming to be reverent and to work on yourself, do some, like, don't enter here type of thing. So I've had a couple of really gnarly experiences. I've been like, okay, lesson learned, we're good. But I think for me, a bigger part, you know, my psychedelic journey started with ayahuasca before any other psychedelics, which, you know, a little bit of a harsh entry point in retrospect. I wish I kind of built up stamina and got my sea legs under me. I definitely got my ass kicked in a good way. But I think for me, you know, it was watching the progression of 3 nights of my very first journey. I had, you know, a toddler, and was looking at potentially transitioning from my career at the hospital. And I was just like, I was going with the intent, and there was no prep, you know, or anything. I was going to join a vetted group and ceremony with some other folks that I had known and like 30 other people I didn't know, right? And like, it's like, all right. I remember driving up there and I was like, I should probably like get clear why I'm doing this, because there's probably gonna be like an intention thing. I hear about that. And I was like, you know what? I wanna know if I should leave my job. And I was like, all right, that's what I'm going in. So like, you know, I'm just all in awe of the ceremony and the beauty, and I have no understanding what anything is happening in Icaros, but I'm like, yeah, that's really cool. And this is such an experience. And I drop into the journey, and I go through like 7 past lives where I die every time when I'm right around 20, and they're like horrific deaths. And I'm like, what the fuck was that? Like, I just wanted to ask if I should leave my job. What does that even mean? But I think there was a much bigger part of like coming back to remembering like parts of me and why those fears show up in this lifetime. Mm-hmm. And it was just like this, like, holy shit, my work to do is so much bigger than just what my career is right now. My career is not the reason why I feel like a stagnant human. My lack of spiritual growth, my lack of connection to tribe, my lack of this, that's why I'm feeling stunted. That's why the medicine thought I needed to go through a remembrance of all the shit as to what I had to go through to get here. But like those are huge pivot points. Right? And could I have gone there with traditional therapy and other stuff? Yeah, I probably could have. It would have taken probably more time, and I probably would have had many conversations about my career instead. But I think that was kind of, I always remember that to help when I'm having conversations with people that are new to doing this work and considering it, is like, let's have a conversation about like why we're coming to this space and what we're thinking this is going to be like. I really came to the space thinking the medicine is going to show me. I'm going to take this thing, I'm going to have experience, I'm going to get a download, and I'm going to leave a happy customer, right? It's like, yeah, again, it was like, yeah, no. I left with so many more questions, existential terror. Like, it was like, oh, I have a lot of work to do. I think because of how the ceremony is by the third night, I also felt like such a steward of the land. And I was like, I get why people leave these and like start communes and have urban chickens and like, I'm going to grow my own vegetables.
We had to shut down 7 cults that she tried to start after that.
Yeah. I'm like, this is like, oh my God, I get it. And it's like this profound sacredness. But I think for me, these journeys are much more about me remembering my connection to spirituality, growing up very Catholic in an organized religion that didn't quite fit. But I think there's a lot of unlayering of this, like, I can't have a direct connection to something bigger than me. And so a lot of my work in this terrain has been healing some lineage line stuff, but remembering my connection with like what I consider my higher power, with this bigger universal energy. And, I am someone that always rolled my eyes when someone was like, my healer, and be like, oh God, like, or like, the medicine will show you the way. Like, I'd be like, okay, well, does it have a brochure? Like, can I read up on it? Like, my irreverent humor has always been an issue in this. And a lot of it's just because it's like, I didn't think I had the ability to access this myself. So I think that's what a lot of my first journey experiences kind of connected to. They were very broadsiding, probably in a beautiful way, or I never would have done them.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you for sharing. And to you both, is there a psychedelic that you feel curious to explore but haven't yet?
I could go while she's pondering her list of psychedelics. I definitely feel called. It's interesting. I feel like I am someone who like gets in an experience, I work on it, and then I'm kind of in this phase of life of like, I want to be called to do this work. And then when I feel a stirring, like all of a sudden an opportunity arises. It's really kind of cool. And so, that part of like entrusting the process, and until there is an unfolding of something, then get to work consciously and do that. I think Wachuma and peyote's grandfather medicine is really kind of the next calling for me. Katie has been speaking very highly of a tribe down in Mexico that I think they've showed up in dreams, they show up in meditations, and there's definitely a calling. And it's been funny to watch me building a clinic and getting very involved in like the ops, and and it's just like, I don't have time to journey. It's like you coach on creation of this. And so it's been interesting to see what has gotten in the way of my work personally over the last year and a half. And a lot of it's because of this like need to be efficient or productive, or not connecting to my flow. So I definitely, anything that involves getting back and laying on the land and connecting with the people who walked the land before is very healing for me. And so I consider myself an earth person. Like, I'd rather be in a shrub than in the air or near fire or water. Like that's my element. So anything that helps me return to the land. And I think I also know for me, I'm not one that should typically journey inside. I feel very confined no matter how big the building is. And I'm like, oh my God, there's walls. And so I need air. I need trees. I need, just kind of to be on ground. So long-winded story to say I would like to try peyote.
Come with me.
Yeah.
There's so much wisdom in plants, and I can honestly say that I do tend to fall into more of the natural plant world. I prefer them to be plant-based or toad-based. I honestly can't think of any that I feel like I would want to or need to try. Again, I tend to go more for the human connection. I really like the ceremony. I've even sat in like peyote ceremonies and not taken the medicine just because I just wanted to sit with the songs and the prayers, and that was what was so beautiful to me. But all the medicines have their own very unique ways of communicating, and I ended up in Gabon partially because of peyote. And I remember I was in my journey and I said, I was like, Iboga, I want you to meet Kayamari. And he's like, yeah, we go way back. I was like, oh yeah, of course you do. Like they are so, all of these energies are so connected that like we think that we're doing something novel by introducing Iboga to peyote, which was not a novel thing apparently. But yeah, I'm sure that someday something will pop into my field and I'll sit with it and I'll listen to it and I'll see if it's, something that calls to me. But as of right now, I'm not a psychonaut at all. I mean, I only sit with these medicines really in ceremony and to do some excavating because of the work that I do, or, my own intentional healing. It's all kind of the same and mixed in together. And all of the medicines just have their own unique way of helping with that. So
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that answer. It's the first time we've gotten that answer to that question. So very cool. Thank you for sharing. Well, thank you ladies for joining us tonight. It's been a joy to have you at the District House.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.